All right, I get this question often enough that I'm going to do a separate video on it, hopefully not too long. The question is, what's the difference between a biface and a preform? Now, I'm going to give you the textbook answer according to Andrzejewski, and I'm going to give you my answer according to how I see it. Okay? Andrzejewski discusses that topic in this book called Lithics, and also in this book called Lithic Debitage. All right, I'm going to go to this book since this is the usual textbook that is used by archaeologists. Okay, here we go. It says here under Biface Tools, page 77, to review, bifaces are objective pieces. He calls them objective pieces. I call them work pieces. Objective pieces that have been extensively modified and have two sides or faces that meet to form a single edge that circumscribes the entire artifact. Both faces show evidence of previous flake removals. All right, that's the basic definition. Now, preforms is down here. And he puts them into an unhafted biface category. All right. The unhafted biface category includes all those bifaces that simply do not have haft elements and are known as preforms, point tips, and bifacial knives, etc. All right, so to recap, Andrzejewski, when he sees something flaked on both sides and an edge all the way around, it's a biface. That could be something like a core like this, or it doesn't have to be something that will be finished into a point or a finished point. I don't have any finished points that I can show you, but you know what I mean. So in other words, let's see, I think the vast majority of preforms, I think all of the preforms are bifaces, but not all bifaces are preforms. All right? His definition of a preform is something that does not have a haft element on it. Like it doesn't have an area where you can stick it onto a stick. It doesn't have an obvious place where you can haft it. He says that's a preform. And it can include broken off tips. It can include these blades that look like you can't tell where it's going to be hafted. Stuff like that. He puts preforms into unhafted biface category. All right. I don't look at it that way at all. Okay. Let's get into my definitions of biface and preform. All right. All right, let's start with preforms. For me, preforms have at least two attributes that resemble the intended representative type. This is how you identify them when found. The found object may not be a preform, but it is better to give it the benefit of the doubt until evidence is found to the contrary. The general rule is a preform looks unfinished. Okay, and the important thing to remember is that a preform, for me, is a transitional stage during the manufacturing process. Okay, that's important to keep in mind. There has to be a manufacturing process being performed on the workpiece before it can be considered a preform. All right, if it snaps accidentally and it doesn't have a haft element, that's not a preform in my view, because that snapping is not part of the manufacturing process. All right, it's different from Andrzejewski's definition. All right, preforms are a transitional stage during the manufacture of a representative point type. Representative means the intended, pristine, undamaged type. So if you wanted to make a certain type, you get your stone, You rough it out into a biface, and then you start the process of getting that biface to look like your finished point. That transition, anywhere during that transitional stage, it's a preform. As long as it starts to look like the finished point, starts to take on the appearance of the finished point, it's a preform. Okay? It has to have at least 2 attributes that resemble the intended representative type. All right? For me, preforms do not exist outside of the manufacturing process. They are not broken tips. They're not utilized flakes. They're not bifaces obtained in trade, etc. Unless they have been worked to some degree in the manufacturing process of the representative type. All right, now let's go into what I consider to be a biface. I got these mixed up here. Let's just do this here. I'll figure it out. Let's see. For me, a biface is a flaked core, or a workpiece, with 60% or more of both surfaces covered by flake scars that were made during the manufacturing process. A uniface is pretty much the same thing, except it's only worked on one surface. 60% or more of one surface covered by flakes during the manufacturing process. Okay, that's how I define a biface. Flaked core, or it could start out as a spall or a nodule or whatever. It has 60% or more of both surfaces covered by flake scars. The edges don't need to be all chipped. Andrzejewski says all the edges need to be worked so that there is an edge. I don't require an edge. When I call something a biface, I don't require it to be edged. It could have cortex on the bottom, or it could have a square edge somewhere, and it's still a biface to me. Okay? Let's see. If the core does not have 60% flaked on either side, but it does have flake scars made during a manufacturing process, I call it a worked or retouched flake, spall, or core. All right? Just to be clear. So, with my definition of preform, it's a transitional stage between the rough biface and the finished piece. Anywhere in that transitional stage, if it gets put down to be worked later and found in the transitional state, that's a preform. But it needs to have at least 2 attributes that resemble the finished piece in order to be identified as a preform if you just happen to find it. Okay, that's kind of important. Most guys ask me this question because they want to identify stuff that they found. Just as long as it has 2 features at least 2 features that resemble the finished point, I would call it a preform if you just happen to find it. All right? And a biface, for me, is just worked more than 60% on both sides. Doesn't have to have a sharp edge all the way around, like Andrzejewski says. It can have cortex. It can have a square edge. It can have a mistake. It can have cracks. It can still be a biface as long as both sides are worked at least 60%. Okay? So I hope that helps. All right.